Hello again. Dear me, I must be getting older because Black History Month seems to come round faster and faster. The various legends and myths which are propagated by this event also grow with the telling and become ever more fantastic, although nobody seems to notice this is happening, or perhaps they're too polite to mention it. I want to talk today about one legend which has become hugely popular, and that is that in 1948 the British government invited people in the West Indies to come to Britain to help rebuild the nation in the aftermath of the Second World War and the devastation wrought by the Luftwaffe. This particular story has grown in strength over the last few years since the so-called scandal of the Windrush generation, and it's now simply spoken of as though it were a fact. I give 4 links in the description to this video. One to a newspaper article from the Daily Mirror, which simply repeats this idea as though it were history, and the second from the Black History Month website, which has a bit written by a black woman who apparently teaches social history at a university. The good Lord preserve us. She writes, "The truth is that the symbolism of the Empire Windrush presents is that black people came here at the invitation of a conservative government as much needed vital labour to rebuild this country after the devastation and ravages from World War II. 2 serious errors of fact in one sentence, no mean feat. The Empire Windrush arrived in 1948 at a time when there was a Labour government, and the black people on board had not been invited at all. This then is the form of the myth, and it's been created so that white British people can be portrayed as ungrateful racists. After all, they asked a load of West Indians to come and help them rebuild their country, and now they want to get rid of them. What a way to treat those people who came over to help us." Here are the facts. These can easily be checked by anybody minded to do so. The accounts of the passengers who came to Britain on the Windrush make no mention ever of being invited to come, nor of any offers of work. I give a link to personal accounts by half a dozen people who came to Britain on the Empire Windrush in 1948, and they all make it clear that there was no invitation or offer of any jobs. That's the 3rd link in the description to this video. Half a dozen first-hand accounts of how people came to get on the Empire Windrush in Jamaica and come to Britain. They just thought that they might do better for themselves in Britain than they could in Jamaica. Far from coming to this country to help Britain rebuild, they were actually coming to help themselves. The Empire Windrush was a troop ship which was returning to Britain from Australia, and it was going via Jamaica to pick up some soldiers who were on leave. It was operated by a commercial company on behalf of the Ministry of Transport, and it was half empty. Somebody in the company had the brilliant idea of advertising cheap places on the ship in Kingston, Jamaica, to try and make a little extra money for the company. On the April 15th, 1948, an advertisement was placed in the Daily Gleaner, a Jamaican newspaper, offering fares as low as £28 to get to Britain. The thumbnail to this video shows that advertisement. There is nothing about work. It was not placed by the British government, and it was not an invitation. The Empire Windrush docked at Tilbury on June the 21st, 1948. In fact, the British government had no idea at all that a lot of Jamaicans were heading for Britain, and they had to make emergency provision for them. There was discussion in Cabinet about whether it would be possible to prevent any more coming, as this would likely be a nuisance if it happened again. The Minister for Labour, George Isaacs, told Parliament that there would be no encouragement for anybody to follow their example. I give a link to a report in Hansard, the official record of parliamentary proceedings, from September the 21st, 1948. An MP asked the Minister of Labour, Can the minister say what is the policy of the government regarding labour from the West Indies? Do they encourage it or discourage it? And the reply from the Minister of Labour, George Isaacs, was very plain. I can tell the honourable member that provided we are notified of the arrival of any of these people, we will do our very best to place them as we did in this instance. Does this sound like a man issuing an invitation? Behind the scenes, the government was trying to see if they could stop any more Jamaicans turning up unannounced. This then is the true story of the Empire Windrush, and it's very different from the legend which is now being circulated. Those who claim that these people were invited are sometimes getting muddled up with things such as London Transport's recruiting drive in the late 1950s. There was at that time a shortage of all sorts of staff, especially bus drivers. London Transport advertised in Ireland, and then they also advertised in Malta. They were keen on Malta because, of course, they also drive on the left-hand side of the road in that country, or did at that time. After a while, they began casting the net wider, and in 1956 started advertising in Barbados. This was, of course, not a government initiative, and nor was it a general invitation for West Indians to start flocking to Britain. Instead, it was a limited operation to recruit staff for one particular business. Others did the same. For example, some regional health authorities advertised that they would train nurses in Britain. That's pretty much it, really. If anybody wishes to establish the truth of all this, they can either read the links I give or look around for themselves. Even Wikipedia, which is not always the most reliable source, has an article on the Empire Windrush which is fairly accurate about this. In short, the idea that the British government advertised in the West Indies and invited people to come to Britain is untrue. The idea that West Indians came to Britain to rebuild the country is also utterly false. As it is Black History Month in Britain, perhaps we can take the opportunity to look at and tell people about some real black history and not the silly fairy tales which have been dreamed up by the Lord knows whom.